Chapter 6: The Flow of Food. Preparation.
Oh, hot. There isn't much that we don't serve here. Hot and cold buffets with everything from entrees to desserts. Fresh carved turkey, ham, and rib roast. On top of that, you can order steaks, chops, chicken, and salmon hot off the grill. And that doesn't even count breakfast. We've got a big kitchen. Everything we got going on keeps it going full tilt all the time. They really have to stay on their toes in there. And so do I. I've been with Charlie's for as long as I can remember. I started on the floor and worked my way up. And along the way, I must have taken every food safety course that corporate had to offer. And that's on top of all the management and training courses that I've taken. I wanted to cover as much as I could because there's a lot to know, a lot to watch out for, and a lot of knowledge to pass on to my staff. I learned two basic lessons early on way back when. The first was to develop 20/20 vision with the eyes in the back of my head. And the other was to train my staff right so I can rely on their skills and their eyes to keep our food safe and the operation running smoothly. Because after we've safely received and stored all our food, it has to be prepared, cooked, cooled, reheated, and served with just as much care and attention to detail. We have to do that because the risk of cross-contamination and time-temperature abuse are the greatest at those particular points in the flow of food. To prevent these risks, you're going to need to know how to thaw food, how to prepare specific food, how to cook food, and about the cooking requirements for specific types of food. You'll also need to know the proper way to cool food, reheat food, hold food, and serve food. Let's start with food that you've just taken out of the freezer. When you thaw frozen food, it's exposed to the temperature danger zone. And just like that, any foodborne microorganism present will begin to grow. To prevent this growth, you need to make sure that food is never thawed at room temperature. There's only 4 acceptable methods for thawing potentially hazardous food, which is also known as food that needs time and temperature control for safety, or TCS food for short. You can thaw food in a refrigerator at 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius, or lower. You can submerge it under running potable water at a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius, or lower. You can do it in a microwave oven, but only if the food will be cooked immediately after thawing. And you can do it as part of the cooking process. Just remember that the product has to meet the required minimum internal cooking temperature. Preparation is the next step in the flow of food in your operation, and you have to take precautions here too. Let's start with salads containing food that need time and temperature control for safety, such as salads with chicken, tuna, egg, pasta, and potato in them. These have all been involved in foodborne illness outbreaks. Since these salads are not typically cooked after they've been prepared, you don't have the chance to eliminate microorganisms that may have been introduced during preparation. But if you follow these preparation guidelines, you'll minimize the risk associated with them. First, if you're using leftovers to make salads like pasta, chicken, or potatoes, make sure you've eliminated any potential hazards. That means that these ingredients should only be used if they've been cooked, held, cooled, and stored properly. And you should also make sure that they haven't been kept past the use-by date. Food that needs time and temperature control for safety also includes eggs and egg mixtures, since they're able to support the rapid growth of microorganisms. If you're preparing egg dishes requiring little or no cooking, you should consider using pasteurized shell eggs or egg products. You can do that for dishes such as mayonnaise, eggnog, Caesar salad dressing, and hollandaise sauce. If you mainly serve high-risk populations, use pasteurized eggs or egg products when serving dishes that are raw or undercooked. Shell eggs that are pooled must also be pasteurized. You may use unpasteurized shell eggs if the dish will be cooked all the way through, such as an omelet or a cake. When you're preparing produce, you need to closely follow these guidelines. You have to make sure fruit and vegetables do not come in contact with surfaces exposed to raw meat and poultry. So you need to prepare produce away from raw meat, poultry, eggs, and cooked and ready-to-eat food. And you should clean and sanitize the workspace and all utensils you're going to use during preparation. After that, you have to wash fruit and vegetables thoroughly under running water so you can remove dirt and other contaminants. Only after you've done that can you start cutting, cooking, or combining them with any other ingredients. And you have to pay particular attention to leafy greens, such as lettuce and spinach. Dirt and other contaminants can hide between the leaves, so you should always remove the outer leaves and pull the items completely apart. Then rinse them thoroughly. Now, let's move on to cooking. The only way to reduce microorganisms in food to safe levels is to cook it to the required minimum internal temperature. Now, this temperature must be reached and held for a specific amount of time. This temperature will vary from product to product. Use a thermometer with a suitable sized probe to make sure that the product has reached its required minimum internal temperature for a specific amount of time. Now remember, I'm talking about the internal temperature of the food, not the temperature setting for an oven. When checking temperatures, always check in the thickest part of the food, taking at least 2 readings in different locations. Remember, while cooking can reduce the number of microorganisms on food to safe levels, it will not destroy spores or toxins they may have produced. That's why it's really critical to handle food safely before it's cooked. That way, spores and toxins don't have time to form. Now, there's different cooking requirements for specific types of food. For all poultry, that includes whole or ground chicken, turkey, and duck, cook to a minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius, for 15 seconds. If you're making stuffed meat, fish, poultry, and pasta, you need to cook it until the food reaches a minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius, for 15 seconds. And when you're cooking ground meat, such as hamburgers or sausage, you should cook it until it reaches the minimum internal temperature of 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 Celsius, for 15 seconds. If you're cooking injected meat, like brined ham and flavor-injected roasts, you have to cook it until it reaches the minimum internal temperature of 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 Celsius, for 15 seconds. For pork, beef, veal, and lamb, make sure you cook steaks and chops to a minimum internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 Celsius, for 15 seconds. For roasts, you need to cook them until they reach a minimum internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 Celsius, and hold at that temperature for 4 minutes. Fish should be cooked until it reaches a minimum internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 Celsius, for 15 seconds. There's different guidelines for eggs, and they can be divided into 2 different categories: immediate service and hot held. If you're preparing them to serve right away, they should be cooked to a minimum internal cooking temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 Celsius, for 15 seconds. But if they're going to be hot held for service, they should be cooked to a minimum internal temperature of 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 Celsius, for 15 seconds. When you're cooking food that needs time and temperature control for safety, like eggs, poultry, fish, and meat in the microwave, its minimum internal temperature should be 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius. Be sure to cover the food and rotate or stir it halfway through cooking. And after cooking, let it stand at least 2 minutes to let the temperature even out. But there's more than cooking temps to watch out for. Cooling is just as important. Food that needs time and temperature control for safety must be cooled from 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 to 21 Celsius, within 2 hours. And then from 70 degrees to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 to 5 Celsius, or lower in the next 4 hours. Remember, this is a two-stage process, 2 hours plus 4 hours. Both stages are very important, and it's critical that you keep your eye on the clock, especially during the first stage. That's because while microorganisms grow well in the temperature danger zone, they grow much faster at temperatures between 125 degrees and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 52 and 21 Celsius. So food must pass through this temperature range quickly to minimize this growth. Cooling the food to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius, within 2 hours allows it to pass quickly and safely through the most dangerous part of the temperature danger zone. But if food hasn't reached 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius, within 2 hours, you have to either throw it out or reheat it and cool it again. Keep in mind that if you can cool the food from 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 to 21 Celsius, in less than 2 hours, you can use the remaining time to cool it to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 Celsius, or lower. However, the total cooling time cannot be longer than 6 hours. For example, if you cool food from 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 to 21 Celsius, in 1 hour, you have the remaining 5 hours to get the food to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 Celsius, or lower. As always, check your local regulatory requirements. These are reliable times and temperatures, but make sure you check them against your local requirements. Now, when you're talking about cooling food, let's start with the big don't. You should never place large quantities of hot food in a refrigerator to cool. That's because refrigerators are designed to keep cold food cold. Most are not designed to cool hot food quickly. Besides that, placing hot food in a refrigerator may raise the internal temperature of the cooler. You can be warming up the interior and putting all the food stored there at risk. Before you start cooling food, you should begin by reducing its size to more workable portions. This allows it to cool faster. So cut large food items into smaller pieces or divide large containers of food into smaller containers or shallow pans. Once you've done that, there's a number of ways to cool food quickly and safely. Now here's the 3 most common methods. 1, you can put the food in an ice water bath. You divide the food into smaller containers, then place them into a sink or large pot filled with ice water. Then stir the food frequently to cool it faster and more evenly. 2. Food will cool even faster if you stir it with an ice paddle. An ice paddle is hollow, so it can be filled with ice or with water and then frozen. 3. You can place food in a blast chiller or tumble chiller. Now, blast chillers move cold air across food at high speeds to remove heat. They're especially useful in chilling large quantities of food like several pans of chili. Whenever you can, use a combination of these methods to cool food quicker. That's enough on cooling. Proper reheating of food has to be done just as carefully. Food that needs time and temperature control for safety that has been previously cooked, then reheated for hot holding, must be moved through the temperature danger zone as quickly as possible. You'll need to reheat it to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius, for 15 seconds within 2 hours. If the food hasn't reached this temperature within 2 hours, throw it out. With all the buffet service we have here, proper food holding is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So, let me go over the general rules with you that you've got to follow to keep your food safe. Regularly check the internal temperature.
When preparing food, make sure workstations, cutting boards, and utensils are clean and sanitized. Only remove as much food from the cooler as you can prep in a short period of time. Return prepped food to the cooler or cook it as quickly as possible. Food and color additives. Only use additives approved by your local regulatory authority. Never use more additives than are allowed by law. Never use additives to alter the appearance of food. Do not sell produce treated with sulfites before it was received in the operation. And never add sulfites to produce that will be eaten raw. Food must be offered to customers in a way that does not mislead or misinform them. Customers must be able to judge the true appearance, color, and quality of food. Present food honestly. If it is not presented honestly, it must be thrown out. Food that has become unsafe must be thrown out unless it can be safely reconditioned. All food, especially ready-to-eat food, must be thrown out if in the situations highlighted in the slide. Sometimes food can be restored to a safe condition. This is called reconditioning. For example, a hot food that has not been held at the correct temperature may be reheated if it has not been in the temperature danger zone for more than 2 hours. When frozen food is thawed and exposed to the temperature danger zone, pathogens in the food will begin to grow. To reduce this growth, never thaw food at room temperature. When thawing food under running water, the flow of the water must be strong enough to wash loose food bits into the drain. Always use a clean and sanitized food prep sink when thawing food this way. Never let the temperature of the food go above 41 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, for longer than 4 hours. This includes the time it takes to thaw the food, plus the time it takes to prep or cool it. The photo shows the correct way to thaw food under running water. Because of concerns about the potential for botulism, frozen fish in ROP packaging has special handling practices. Note the slide for the recommendations. Refrigerate and hold cut melons, cut tomatoes, and cut leafy greens at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. They are TCS foods. Many operations hold other fresh cut produce at this temperature as well. Certain chemicals may be used to wash fruits and vegetables. Also, produce can be treated by washing it in water containing ozone. This treatment helps control pathogens. Your local regulatory authority can tell you what is acceptable to use for this. Pooled eggs are eggs that are cracked open and combined in a container. Check with your local regulatory authority to see if pooling eggs is allowed. Egg dishes requiring little or no cooking include Caesar salad dressing, hollandaise sauce, tiramisu, and mousse. Use pasteurized eggs or egg products when serving raw or undercooked dishes to high-risk populations. Make ice from water that is safe to drink. Never use ice as an ingredient if it was used for a different function, like to keep food cold. For example, if ice was used to cool food on a salad bar, It cannot then be used in drinks. You will need a variance when prepping food in certain ways. A variance is a document issued by your local regulatory authority that allows a regulatory requirement to be waived or changed. This slide gives examples of when a variance would be required. Reduced oxygen packaging, ROP, includes MAP. Vacuum packed and sous vide food, as shown in the photo. When applying for a variance, your local regulatory authority may require you to submit a HACCP plan. The HACCP plan must account for any food safety risks related to the way you plan to prep the food item. You must comply with the HACCP plan and procedures submitted. Finally, you must maintain the HACCP plan and any other associated documents, including the variance, at the operation, and you must provide them to the regulatory authority if requested. Records must show that you have the procedures for monitoring critical control points and are regularly monitoring them. They must also show that you are taking the necessary corrective actions if there is a failure at a critical control point and are verifying the effectiveness of the procedures and processes. Now we will go over the minimal internal cooking temperatures. 165 degrees Fahrenheit for less than 1 second needs to be poultry, whole or ground chicken, turkey, or duck, stuffing made with fish, meat, or poultry, stuffed meat, seafood, poultry, or pasta, and dishes that include previously cooked TCS ingredients. Minimum internal cooking temperatures for 155 degrees Fahrenheit for 17 seconds include ground meat, beef, pork, and other meats. Meat that has been mechanically tenderized with needles or blades, or by injecting it with brine or flavors. Meat vacuumed, tumbled with marinades or other solutions. Ground meat from game, animals commercially raised and inspected. Ratites are mostly flightless birds with flat breastbones, and they include ostrich and emu. Ground seafood, including chopped or minced seafood, and shell eggs that will be hot held for service. Minimum internal cooking temperatures for 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds include seafood, which includes fish, shellfish, and crustaceans, steaks, chops of pork, beef, veal, and lamb, commercially raised game, and shell eggs that will be served immediately. Roasts may be cooked to these alternative cooking times and temperatures, depending on the type of roast and oven used. The minimum internal cooking temperature for 135 degrees Fahrenheit is for food from plants that will be held hot for service, which includes fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. Some operations partially cook food during prep and then finish cooking it just before service. Partial cooking is also called par cooking. You must follow the steps in the slide if you plan to partially cook meat, seafood, poultry, or eggs, or dishes containing these items. Your local regulatory authority will require you to have written procedures that explain how the food cooked by this process will be prepared and stored. These procedures must be approved by the regulatory authority and describe the items on the slide. TCS food must be cooked to the required minimum internal temperatures unless a customer requests otherwise. You can remind customers of the risks by posting a notice on your menu. You can also provide this information using brochures, table tents, signs, and other written methods. The FDA advises against offering raw or undercooked meat, poultry, seafood, or eggs on children's menus. This is especially true for undercooked ground beef, which may be contaminated with Shiga toxin producing E. coli. Never serve raw seed sprouts, raw or undercooked eggs, meat, or seafood, and unpasteurized milk or juice. When you want to cool foods, it is important to think of the factors that affect cooling the foods. The denser the food, the more slowly it will cool. Large food items cool more slowly than smaller items. To let food cool faster, you should reduce its size. Cut large food items into smaller pieces. Divide large containers of food into smaller containers or shallow pans. Stainless steel transfers heat away from food faster than plastic. Shallow pans let the heat from food disperse faster than deep pans. This slide goes over the methods for cooling foods. You can stir it with an ice paddle or use ice or cold water as an ingredient. When storing food for further cooling, loosely cover food containers before storing them, and food can be left uncovered if protected from contamination. These guidelines apply to all heating methods, such as ovens or microwave ovens. And that concludes Chapter 6. Please use your ServSafe Food Manager book to apply your knowledge to the following problems to get more practice from this chapter.